Right, so let's see if we have anyone here, and if you can hear me fine, and if you can like look at my screen. Let me also tweet. There we go. All right, let me close that. Can somebody comment if you can hear me fine and if you can look at my screen? That is good. We can see your screen. Thank you, Jason. All right. So everything's fine. Thanks. All right. So the idea is to talk about testing in AdonisJS in case if you haven't saw the release, we dropped support for testing in AdonisJS, and here are the release notes that you can go through. And we will be exploring like how exactly AdonisJS approaches testing, how to configure it, and how the testing flow looks like. And then we will like move on to creating a small dummy application, writing some tests inside it, and taking care of things like how to authenticate someone, how to upload files. And the most exciting thing is to basically use the OpenAPI schema to drive the test. So that's like the main primary focus. So what I'm going to do now is create a new application. So I haven't prepared anything. I haven't tested anything before the stream, so I'm not sure how it will go. I hope it will be smooth. Let's start by creating a new app. So npm init AdonisJS app @latest. Let's call it a blog. And it will be an API server. Let's configure ESLint and prettier both. It will take a while to basically install all the dependencies. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will try my best to answer them. All right. All right, the project has been created. Let's cd into the directory, open it inside our editor. And this is how like an AdonisJS application looks like. There are a few changes now that we have shipped the support for testing. And that is, you will have, like a couple of additional files and this test folder. And also you can run tests by saying node ace test. It will like run the hello world dummy test that we create for you. And if you want, you can like run tests in watch mode that will like watch the file system and rerun the test anytime you change anything. So very first, let's see how AdonisJS run the test, like how the typical workflow looks like. So the testing process is managed by this file called test.ts. And out here, we have like a few imports. We also import like the Java test runner, which is a homegrown testing framework for Node. And then we use the igniter module of AdonisJS, and we boot the AdonisJS application. And once the AdonisJS application is booted, we call the configure method on Java to basically configure the test runner. And when we do that, we also import this special file that's inside the test directory, and the name of the file is bootstrap. So let's see this file. Inside this file, you can write any code you want to configure the test runner. So what we are doing by default is we install few of the Java plugins out here. We use the spec reporter. We register these runner hooks. Runner hooks are basically the functions that you want to run before and after all the tests. And here we basically hook up into suites. So what AdonisJS does is it divides your tests into multiple test suites. So for example, when you are writing end-to-end tests using a browser, or maybe like you are hitting your endpoints, those are functional tests. And then you can also have like unit tests. And you can keep all these like functional and unit tests inside their own directories. And you configure them as different suites. And within the AdonisJS, like adonisrc.json file, you register these suites. So by default, a functional suite is registered. It will load all the files from this particular directory. If you want, you can register more suites. Let's say if you want to write unit tests, you can basically like drop another object to define a unit test suite. And here we basically say the test runner, anytime you're running the functional tests, make sure to start the HTTP server, because we assume that when you're writing the functional tests, you do want to interact with your AdonisJS HTTP server. So we just like start that before running the functional suite. This is how testing basically works in a nutshell. And this is how the default test looks like. So we import the test function from Java runner. We define a test. Here we get access to the API client. Now API client is used to make the HTTP request to the AdonisJS server. And once you get the response, you can like assert against the response status, body, headers, like all the standard stuff. So yeah, that's basically the testing 101, how exactly it works. Now let's remove this file and start from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I will be using this OpenAPI spec, which I've created. It has like 3 endpoints. So like the basic idea is to show you how you can use this spec. That's why I've like created just 3 endpoints and not like too much. And so we have like a post endpoint where you can like pass the page number per page, and it will return this output response from the server. So you will get like the metadata of the pagination, and inside this data key, you get like the post ID, post author, standard post stuff. You can create a new post by giving it a title, by giving it content and a cover image. And once the post is created, this is something that the server should return. And if the user is not logged in, the server should return like 401, and this is how the error look like. And if there were like validation errors, the server should return 422, and this is how the validation errors should look like. And finally, we have another endpoint, which is to view a single post. So you have to like pass the post slug here, and the server should return this data back. And if the post does not exist, then it should return 404 with an object of error. So like basically an object with the errors key and an array of errors. And finally out here, I have few schemas that I'm referencing inside these requests. So let's copy everything and create a file called API spec.yaml, and I'm going to like paste everything over here. Next thing we need to do is we need to tell the assert module of AdonisJS to use this spec. So I will say OpenAPI schemas, and here I'm going to import the application from Adonis core application, and I will say make path to API spec.yaml. So what we have really done is we have defined our spec inside this OpenAPI object within the assert plugin. And what this will do is it will allow the assert plugin to give us the assertion functions we can use to test our responses against this API spec out here. So let's create a new test. I'll say node is make test, and we will call it post/index. And we will have to say it's inside the functional suite. So here we created a new test. It says test grub post index. Let's create a new test here. And I will say get a paginated list of posts. And within this callback, I can either like access assert or I can access client. And this object itself is the testing context. And we are like basically pulling off individual properties from that object. And here I will say await client.get. And let's see what our endpoint is. So we have a /post endpoint. I will say /post. Mark this as async, and I should get back response. And then all I have to do is I have to say response.assert against API spec. And that's all I really have to do. And this method will basically go through the spec file. It will look at the /post route. Then it will look at the responses we have defined, and based upon the response status, it will validate the response body against this schema out here. So let's go back to the terminal and see if our test has executed. And out here, our test is failing. It says schema not found for /post, method get, and status 404. So as per the API schema, we have not defined any response code 404. That means our API schema is not expecting 404 from this particular path. And we are getting 404 because we haven't defined any route yet. So let's create a route. So let's get rid of this. I will say a route.resource posts, and it will be handled by the post controller. Let's save and go back. Again, our test reran, and this time it says cannot find module post controller. That means we have to create this controller. So let's say node is make controller. And if we open our controller out here, save it, our test runs again, it says missing method index on post controller. So you basically get the idea. We are like building the entire application and using our test as a way to guide us. So let's create this method called public async index and return something from here. So I'll say hello world. Okay. A test will run again, and this time it says we were expecting the test body to include one meta property and to include the data property, and it should not include hello property. So it's like basically using our response defined inside the spec, which expects meta and this data property and not the hello property. So let's say we say meta, and then we say data, that's an array. Save again. And this time it's telling us that, okay, the meta object is over there, but you don't have like total per page current page, last page, like all the sub properties that the API spec was expecting inside it. So what we are going to do is now, instead of like manually defining all these properties, let's pull all this data from the database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a couple of packages. The first one is Lucid. The other one is auth, because I will be using auth, so like it's better to install it right now. All right, that's done. Let's configure Lucid by saying nowadays configure Lucid. I will be using PostgreSQL, and then it's going to tell us to basically like validate these environment variables. It's optional, you don't have to do it, but I usually do it because if my app is running without these environment variables, I want to get notified about it right away. This and also the DB connection. So this as well. Next, I'm going to configure our auth package as well. It says Lucid, and I will be using web, and I will be using the user model. Let's create the table. That's done as well. Did you create the API schema file, or is it part of the package? No, I created this file manually. Right now, we don't have any tooling which can create this file by, like basically scanning your code base. And there is a reason behind that, because so far, I have not been able to find a workflow which can do it properly. I know a lot of frameworks create the API spec for you by reading the comments inside your code. And I personally think that's not the best way to approach it, because we all know, like, even best of the engineering cultures cannot make sure that your code comments are always in sync with your code. So there is like a lot of chances of having friction. So that's the reason we don't like do anything which scan your code comments and create the API spec for you. And I do it by hand all the time. I know you have to like uh, put a lot of manual effort to do it, but at least that way I have more freedom, more flexibility to create it properly, versus my comments getting out of sync and then everything like falling apart. So we have also like executed, like basically configured our auth package. Now I'm going to create our post table. So notice make migration posts. Let's create a model as well. So model post, and all I need is table dot integer. That's going to be the user ID, like the author who created the post. And it's unsigned, and it's references, ID, and table users. And next we need a string. That's going to be the post title. It should not be nullable. Then we need a table, and we need a text called content. What is your color theme? Let's see. It's night owl. We need the content that should not be nullable as well. Next, we need a JSON column to store our cover image, and it can be nullable. So it's not like mandatory to define the cover image every time. And let's have full name here, and it can be nullable. I think that's pretty much all we need. Let's try to run our migration. Nowadays, migration run. Role Lucid does not exist. Okay, I have to update my environment variables. let's call it Adonis blog. And I will have to like create this database manually. So let me pull in table plus, open, create a new database. I think I already have one. So let's drop it and create a new one. All right, let's run our migrations. Everything went fine. Refresh. We have our post table. We have our users table. One more thing that we have to do manually is define the post table columns here. So we'll say public title. It's a string and it's a column. Then we need content. That's a column as well. And we need public user ID. That's a number. And also, like, let's define our relationship as well. So a post has an author, or I would say like belongs to a user. And here I will say belongs to user. And this user is basically the reference to the user model that we have imported here on the top. I think we are all good. Let's pull in our model here, user, and let's get rid of this and say return user.query. Oh, I think we want to use the post model. Post.query.paginate and page per page. We'll say the page is 1 and then say per page is 20. Later we will like update our code to pull this information from the request, but for now I think it's fine. So let's go back to the terminal and see what's happening. I think we have to rerun our tests. Okay, so our first test is passing because we are returning the data that we expected our API spec to return. Now let's create another test and remove this. This time I want to let's update this just to say return empty list when there are no posts. And here we can say like get a paginated list of existing posts. And finally, in this test, we are testing that the server should return an empty list. For that, we will have to write a few assertions by hand because this particular method out here, it's just testing the shape of the data returned by the server, but it's not testing whether the server has returned an empty array or not. So what I'm going to do is I will say response.assert bodies. I think it's body contains, and here I will say meta total 0, and the data array is basically empty. So yep, our test is still passing. Out here, what I want to test is if I create few posts, they should be returned by this particular endpoint. Again, this method is just going to test the shape of the data, not the actual data. And we will have to like basically write a few assertions by hand. So what I'm going to do first is create a couple of posts out here on the top. And let's use factories for that. So factory.define post. And here we will say return title. That will be, we can pull in faker. We'll say faker dot lorem dot few words. I think 5 is fine. For the content, we will say faker dot lorem dot paragraphs 3, and I think that's pretty much all we need. Let's also define another factory for our user model. And again, we will like pull in faker here, and we will say email faker.internet.email. Password will be faker.internet.password. Full name is going to be faker.name. Yep. Find name. And we have to like define this full name column here. So public full name string. And finally, let's export them. So constant post factory. And here we will say export constant user factory. Let's call the build method as well. So if you don't know what exactly are factories, factories in AdonisJS allows you to, like generate fake data in bulk. So you can like basically use your models, give them to the factory, and then you basically like use the faker module to generate random fake data. And it's like quite useful during testing. So what we're gonna do is go back to our test and let's use our post factory here. I think what we have to do is actually use the user factory, and I'll tell you why. So user factory dot query dot with posts 20, or maybe like let's create 40 posts, and here I say create. Let's then await it. So every post needs to have an author. That means we need a user. And instead of like creating one user for each post, what I'm doing is I'm like first creating a user and then basically creating 40 different posts for that one single user. And we also have to like define this relationship out here. So we have to say relation posts and use the post factory. This relationship needs to be on the model as well. So let's say posts has many type of post and has many posts. All right, so we have defined the has many relationship on our model. Then we are telling our factory to use that relationship. And finally, this code looks fine. And what we want to test is now when we get our response, we should basically get only 20 posts back, not all the 40. And so we can say meta total is going to be 20. And our data should actually include all the posts. So let's see how we can test for that. But very first, let's see how it goes. Okay, it's failing. It says it needs PHP argon 2, which is basically the hashing library used to hash passwords. So let's grab that. All right, let's save, rerun, and our test failed. Let's see why. It says expected 40, we received 160 posts. And the reason it happened because when we were like writing the code, our test was running again and again, and it was like creating new posts every time. And all those posts are basically, like getting collected into our database. So maybe not. Then let's see. Why is that? No, our first test failed. No, it's the second one, sorry. So let's save again, see what happens. It says expected 40, you receive 160. So on which file are we expecting 40 and we are getting 160 on this particular line? Oh, I got it. It's basically not complaining about the total number of posts. It's complaining about these properties. So it's saying that the response should not contain the user ID column and it should contain the author column. So that means we have to go back to our controller and say preload author. So that will like basically preload the author relationship for us. And next, we don't want to return this user ID column back in response. So we can say serialize as null. That basically means when this post is getting converted to a plain JSON object, just remove this property from that object. All right, it's still failing, and this time it's failing because it says the user object should not have the remember me token column. So we have to do the same thing. This remember me token is an internal property, something that we should not leak inside our API responses. And it still fails. But this time, it's something else. It's failing here. And why is that? So it says total we have got is like 200. And we expected total to be 20. So very first, we should expect it to be 40, not 20. And we should expect like per page to be 20 and current page to be 1. Because like the total number of records is not 20, it's 40. Let's save. And this time we are getting like 240 posts and not 40. So let's refresh and we can see that inside our database, we have created a lot of posts because every time we are running the test, it's failing and we are creating like new posts. So what we need to do is we need to like clean up every time our test ends. And for this, AdonisJS gives you a very simple way. So what we are going to do is, it has to be grep like this and setup. So grep.each.setup is a function that runs before every single test inside this grep. And out here, we will use the database module of AdonisJS to basically start a global transaction. Now, what global transactions does is it automatically put all of your database queries inside a transaction. And once we are like done with our test, we will just like roll back that transaction. So what we are doing is before every single test, we are starting the transaction. That means this particular query will automatically be wrapped inside a transaction. And once we are done with our test, we will roll back the transaction. So nothing actually ever makes its way into the database. So let's do that. And we still have posts. So let's try to drop our database. So I'll say node ace migration rollback, and let's rerun our tests. It says, oh, we have to rerun the migrations as well. But instead of running it manually, I will like basically use a hook. But first, given that you have serialized user ID post to null, what happens if you fetch the post without loading the author? Nothing will like really happen because when I say do not serialize the user ID, it means the database query will like run as normal. But when we are giving the response back to the client, which is like our tests in this case, the user ID will be removed. So serialization layer runs after the database query has been finished. I hope like that answer your questions. If not, feel free to ask again. How come the paginate method in the index post controller not returning 40 posts? Because we have defined our per page limit to 20. It's a hard coded limit right now. And later, like I will basically pull it from the request. So yeah, where were we? We were trying to run our tests, but before that, we have to run the migrations. So what I'm going to do is, instead of like manually running the migrations, I will use a hook. So I will say testutils.db.migrate. So this is basically like going to migrate the database every time before all the tests, and then it will roll back the database after all the tests have been finished. So let's run Node.js test watch. Yep, as you can see, this time we ran our migrations before running the test, and here we reverted all the migrations, and it's happening by using this hook out here. And if we go back to our database, we don't see any posts, like we don't even see the post table. But as we will like write more tests, you will see the post created inside this test will not leak into other tests because we are rolling our transaction back out here. All right, so it seems our test works fine now. Another thing I want to assert is that our response has received the posts I have created out here. So for that, we can write, like a couple of assertions manually. So I will say constant posts await post dot query dot limit 20 order by ID descending. And now I expect that assert dot contains subset, and we expect our post dot to contain response dot body. Let's see what happens. It fails because it's saying you are okay. It has to be body.data. All right. Right now we are getting an error again, but let's see why. So we expected this, but what we are getting is this. So I think what we have to do is we have to change the arguments. Yep. And now it has content created at title ID. Yeah, so there is an ID mismatch because here we are like basically ordering our post by ID descending, but inside our post controller, we are not doing that. So let's add it here as well. It's still failing because there is an additional property called author. So let's preload that here as well. So, and finally, this query basically returns all the posts as an instance of the post model, but our response contains the plain JSON objects, not the actual class instances. Therefore, we have to convert them to JSON as well. Yep, everything seems to work fine. Now, like this. So we have two endpoints, and we have two tests for this endpoint, And very first, we write a test to make sure like we get an empty list. In the other one, we test that we get the post that we have created. Let's create another one, which allow us to basically customize the per page records for this test. So I will say define custom per page result set. And out here, I will define a query string called per page. And let's say instead of getting 20, I want to get all the 40 posts. And here I should get back 40, not 20. And this time our test fails because we are like returning just 20 posts from the response and not returning 40. So what we need to do is we need to pull in request and say request dot input per page or use 20. So if the per page input is not given, then we need to use 20. Otherwise, we'll use per page. Let's refresh. Yep, everything works fine again. And I think that's pretty much all we need to do for this particular endpoint. Let's move to the other one, which allow us to create a new post. But before that, if you have any questions, feel free to ask that. Yep, that has been the goal behind creating Java because all of the test runner do a lot more than what backend application needs. And the second and the main point is a lot of community engagement and movement there is related to front end. So if you want to like search something related to Jest, a lot of front end or React specific posts will appear versus someone showing how to do that for a backend application. All right, so let's create another test. So I will say nowadays, make test, it will be functional, post.store. And let's copy paste a couple of things. So I will copy these hooks. Here I'll say grep, import database. And let's write the first test, which checks for the validation error. So make sure post title and content is provided. Here I will write async client dot post, and we want to post to the post endpoint. And let's pull in response, and we'll say response dot assert against API spec. Another thing that you can do is you can use this route helper. So instead of like manually giving the endpoints here, you can say route post controller dot store. So it will like get the endpoint for you automatically versus you hard coding the endpoint. Let's go back. It says missing method store and post controller. So let's create it. Public async store and request, which is going to be of type HTTP context contract. And out here, what I want to do is I want to validate the request body by using this method called request.validate. It accepts the schema. And let's pull in something from Adonis validator. That's schema and rules. So I will say schema.create. So we expect the user to define the title, and that should be of type string. And I will trim any sort of white spaces. I will escape the title and basically like remove any sort of HTML tags from it. Like not like really removing, but escaping them. Next is the content, which is again string. Let's get rid of any sort of white spaces around the content. I don't want to escape it. It's fine. And then we can access our title and our content. And we basically have like static types over here. So if I hover over title, it tells us it's a string. If I hover over content, it tells us that it's a string. So you basically have like type safety as well. Next thing I want to do is I want to create a new post by saying title, content. And that's pretty much all. Let's save and see what happens. Make sure post title and content is provided. And right now, our test is passing, and we don't know if it's like working fine or if there is a validation error or anything. Like we have no clarity which particular status code is getting validated over here. So what we can do is we can manually assert against the status. So I can say for this particular request, I expect the server to return 422. And it seems it indeed returns 422. If you want, you can like also assert against like the actual errors that you are expecting. So you can say assert body contains errors, and each error should have a message property saying required validation failed. Let's put it like this and see what happens. And I can say I'm expecting it on field title. Yep, still works fine. And if you like basically want to see how the response looks like, you can say response.dump body. And here you can see like the body returned by the server. Again, like if you want more visual feedback on what exactly got returned from the server, you can do that. And so that's our basically the first test, where we want to make sure that a server is validating the input and it doesn't like create a new post without that input. Let's create another test which says create a new post with title and content. This time I will fill in the form by saying title will be hello world, and body will be hello everyone, this is testing 101. Let's see what happens. It should be content, not body, and this time we should be expecting 201, not 422. So it says we expected 201, but our server returned 200. Which means we need to go back to the post controller and say response.created. So now our server returned 201 because we are like using response.created method, which like sets the status code to 201, but our test is failing because our response is not returning the data property. And if you look at our spec, once we create the post, we expect our server to return this for 201. That means we need to return this post. So I will say data post. And now it says that we were also expecting the author property, but no author property has been defined. And if you notice out here, we don't have any way to have an author because no one is logged in. We are not using authentication or anything. So whereas as per the application, a user must be logged in before they can create a new post. And I've also defined that over here. Like if the user is not logged in, the server should return 401. So what I'm going to do now is I will register a middleware here. So I will say I want to register an auth middleware, which is going to import app middleware auth. This is the file that AdonisJS creates for you automatically when you run notice configure and the auth package name. So here is the actual file, which like basically manages the authentication for you. And let's save this file. Let's go to our routes. And here I will say I want to use a middleware on the store route. And the name of the middleware will be auth. So anytime anyone is making a request for the store method, make sure that they are authenticated. Now we get an error. It says, oh, we have to pull in session as well because we are using session auth. Let me do that quickly. Node A, npmi. All right, let's quickly run node A's configure AdonisJS last session. Okay, let's validate this inside env.js. I think we should be good. Now let's go back to our test. Okay, here it says we are expecting 201, but we are not logged in. That's why the server returned 401, and this 401 is returned by this auth middleware. That means let's update our test and say user must be logged in before creating the post. And here I will say we expect 401 and our body should contain some message. All right, here it says this. So let's update the message. And it says the server returned 422. Oh, in the first one, the server returned 422 because we are not logged in and the middleware runs before the controller. Let's like remove that test for a second. Okay, so here it says this test is passing where we expect the user to be logged in, but they are not logged in. That's the reason we are getting 401. Now what we need is we need a way to basically log in the user before this request has been made. And surprisingly, it's quite easy with our testing setup. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull in the user factory .query.create. So this will like create a dummy user for us. And here I will say login as this user. Now let's run. And it still says that we are getting 401 and not 422. Let's see why. I think why that's happening. This needs to be here, I think. So we are making a post request. We are logging as this particular user, and we get the response back, but our server is not getting it. So let's look at our auth config. We are using the web guard. We are using the sessions driver. And we are using the user mod. What we are basically doing is we are pulling in our authenticated user and we are saying create a new post as a relationship for that particular user. And it will like automatically set the user ID property within the post table for us. And next, we are like setting up this relationship locally within memory so that when we return post, it has the author property. So this call makes the database call. This like sets the property within the memory. And I think let's write another test. Let's see if our spec has. Yep, so it does have a property called cover image, which is of type binary, which means we allow the user to upload the cover image as well. So here I will say create a post with cover image. All right, and now the cover image is going to be like a file. So hello there, so excited about testing in AdonisJS. Me too, Stephen. Now we cannot use like a normal form. We have to make a multi-part request to the server. So instead of saying form, we have to say fields, which makes you cut out for a while. That's been done now. Yeah, but if it happens again, like just let me know right away. So where were we? Yeah, we were talking about. So this fields method makes a multi-part request to the server, and then we can attach a file as well. So I can say we want to upload a cover image, and here we can give a path to a file. So let's pull in our application module, application, and I will say application dot make path to some PNG or JPEG file. Let's pull one. So what I'm going to do, I'll say playground Adonis testing app, and we need to like copy API spec dot JPEG. So I've like pulled in this JPEG file to the root of this project so that we can like reference it here. So we'll say API spec dot JPEG. So we are basically uploading this file to the server, and we expect our response to contain this as well. So let's first, like try to upload it and see what happens. All right, our test is passing. And if we go to our controller, we are not like referencing this image anywhere. Like we are not uploading it. We are not saving a reference to it inside our database. And for that, I'm going to pull in another AdonisJS package. So it's called attachment light. So it's an official package that you can use in order to basically have attachments in your models. So let's copy this command and paste it here. All right. And now we can use this import. So let's go to our post model. And here we can say public cover image is of type attachment contract, and it uses this attachment decorator. Do we need anything else? Let's see, I don't think so. Which means here we can expect a cover image from the user. So I can say schema.file.optional, like it's not mandatory to upload a file. But if you do, the file should have like JPEG, extension, PNG, and it should be like under 1 MB, should not be more than that. And finally, we can pull in our cover image out here. And here we can see a cover image. If cover image exists, we can say attachment dot from file cover image, otherwise null. So all we are really saying is if the cover image exists, then we are like going to create an attachment from that particular file. Otherwise, we will set it to null. Right now, we get an error because as per TypeScript, our cover image field cannot be null. So let's make sure it can be null. And let's come here. Yeah. So what really happened is, if you will notice, new temp slash upload. We have a question. Is it possible to use pop-in file generator? Yep, it's possible. I will be using that in a second. So if you will notice, this temp and uploads folder has been created, but we don't have any file here which was uploaded. And the reason behind that is this attachment light package basically remove all the files if your model does not persist to the database. And if you will notice, when we are writing our test, we are like basically rolling back this transaction. So if you will like visualize the flow, what's happening, we create a new global transaction, we make a database query. At the same time, we are like attaching the cover image. And once the test is over, we are like rolling back the transaction, and attachment light sees, oh, this model has been like rolled back. It never made its way to the database. So there is no point in keeping the files on the disk as well. Let's remove that file as well. Stephen says AdonisJS is the best node framework, but I don't get it. Why not getting attention like NestJS, which is a wrapper around wrapper? I think it's fine. So, and that's the reason we like cannot see the file here. But let's say for a second we remove this hook and only run this test by calling pin. So our test runs again, and this time we can see our uploaded file out here. So the file has been uploaded and it's out here. And if we dump the response, we say like response.dump body, you can see this is our post data. So it has cover image, which has an extension, a size, a MIME type. So basically the file upload was successful. Now, let's get rid of that. Let's remove the pin. Let's get rid of, let's enable our hooks again. Now, if you want to assert that whether the cover image was uploaded or not, we can do it like this. So we can say we expect the cover image property, and it should have a type of image/JPEG. And it should, I think that's pretty much all. It's not type, it's MIME type. We cannot like assert against the name because it's randomly generated. Maybe like we can do the extension as well. So JPEG. And that's this. Yep, it's all good now. Now let's say we want to write another test, but this time we want to say do not allow cover image bigger than 1 MB. So that means this time we need to upload another file which is like greater than 1 MB. And if you will notice, quickly we will start having these dummy files inside our project of different sizes to basically write our tests. Now, to make this entire flow a bit easier, What you can do is you can generate fake files within memory. And for that, we are going to pull in some helpers. So let's see if we have the file helper. Yep, we do. Uh, can you show us some unit tests as well? And is there going to be some improvements in the DI documentation part? So in this particular live stream, there won't be any unit tests. And usually I've noticed when I'm like building applications, I'm writing a lot of functional tests. Unit tests are something that you will write when you know, like build some standalone services or classes around you know, like around some domain model. I don't have any examples in mind, but if I do, I will, you know, like I may do a live stream on that. Regarding the improvements in the DI documentation, yes, that's pending and something I have to document. Right now, like coming back to our file uploads, we are going to like pull this file helper, and here we will say file dot generate JPEG, and this time we want the size. No, I think it takes a single argument to be 2 MB. Wait, I think we have to pull in some properties from here. So it's going to be a promise. We need to pull in contents, name. So here we will like pass in the contents, and here we will say the file name is this name. So what we are basically doing is, instead of keeping these actual files within our project, we are generating a fake file within the memory. And this fake file is generated in a way that it will pass the validations. So let's remove this. And this time we expect to get 422. That works fine. And we expect the body to contain an errors key. That's basically an array. The field should be cover image, and message should be, let's keep it empty string. And the message should be, file should be less than 1 MB. Yep, it works fine now. Yep, functional and end-to-end tests are like kind of same. I call them functional tests. So I think we can also get rid of this. Let's copy our code. And here we will say contents. The file name will be name. And it should not be 2 MB. It can be like 800 KB. Yep, that works fine. And I think we can get rid of this file that we have on disk. Another thing we can do is, let's remove this folder. So right now, every time we upload the file, it gets persisted to the disk. We can also like fake that entire process. Can you remove comment from the screen? Yep. Really sorry for that. So instead of like writing the file to the disk, we can fake the entire process of, you know, like writing the file to the disk and write some assertions against it. And for that, we will be pulling in our drive. So drive is basically a module in AdonisJS that you can use to manage user uploaded files. And drive comes with a lot of different drivers. Like there is a driver for local file system, there is a driver for S3, then there is a driver for Google Cloud Storage. And you can switch between these drivers without changing your code. Maybe like during development, you can use the local driver. And once you go into production, you can use the S3 driver. And drive is the module that is used by attachment light as well to manage the uploaded files. So what I'm going to do is, before we make the request, I will say drive.fake. It will give us a fake drive instance. And what this method is going to do, it will like stub out the real implementation behind the scenes and will use basically a fake in-memory file system. And the benefit of doing this is now you can like basically write assertions and make sure that the file was uploaded. So you can say assert dot is true, await fake drive dot exists this file name. So we can just like test that this file name exists. So let's run again, and it says it's false. That's great. Let's see why. So here we are like faking drive. Then we are uploading the file, and here we are. Let's do await fake drive dot get, but I don't think that will work. Let's like console log fake drive. Let's see what we get. So it says fakes. We are using local, the disk of local name visibility public. Yep, that looks fine to me. Validation, nope. It's not a validation error. What really happening is we have uploaded this file and now we are expecting this file to exist by using this fake drive. So let's go back to our and see what can be the reason. Or we get our cover image, or we are using attachment from file, which basically uses drive. Oh yeah, you're right. Boom. I'm just doing it in the wrong place. So let's copy this and paste it here. And let's paste it here and see how it goes. And I have to like pull in the assert object from here. Yep, it works fine. And let's also like fake it here. And this time we expect the file to not exist because the validation failed. So this time it should be false. Yep, it works fine. Yep, got it. I fixed that. Thank you, Stephen. So yeah, let's look at this flow. I think a lot of stuff is happening out here. So first we create like a user using our user factory. Then we create a fake file, which generates an in-memory file. Then we fake the drive implementation. It means any part of your application that is using drive to manage the file uploads will not write files to the destination. It will write it to an in-memory fake that has been created behind the scenes. Now, the good thing about doing this fake is because you can like write these assertions quite easily without, like making your test slower. And then we like make a request, we log in as our user, we send these fields, we send this file, and then we are like basically writing these assertions. I think that's pretty much all we want to test when it comes to creating a new post. So we have a test which makes sure that the user is logged in. We make sure that a user provides the title and content. Otherwise, the validation fails. Then we have tested that we are able to like upload the cover image. And we have also tested that we do not allow cover images bigger than 1 MB. If you want, like, you can write another test to make sure that only the given extensions are allowed. I will skip that for now and go to our final endpoint, that is to basically show a single post. So let's create a new test. Node is make test functional, and I will say post slash show. And here we will say test return 404 when post does not exist. So let's make it in async, pull our client, and I'm also going to like copy paste these hooks. And we're going to pull in our database and also get our grep here. So I will say await client dot get, and we want to make a request to our post controller dot show, and we want to pass in a post ID. Right now we don't have any posts, so I'm just going to like pass a dummy ID called 1. And here we have response dot assert status 404, and response dot assert against API spec. So let's see what happens. We don't have the show method, so let's create one. Public async show, pull in our request, and let's wait. Is that fleet? No, that's Sublime Text. And we'll say post.find or fail request.param ID. So param is basically the route parameter. And here we are saying like find the post if you get it, otherwise fail. Let's save it to a variable and check what happens. Okay, so it says that we got 404, but our body does not have the message property, and it does not have the errors property. Oh, it has a message property that it should not have, but it does not have the errors property. So there are a couple of ways to solve it. Either we can say find, and if the post does not exist, we can like return the expected response from our controller. The other way is we can still like use find or fail, but go to our global exception handler and like handle this error. So error context, error is going to be any, context is going to be contract. Let's pull that in. And here I will say if error.code is equal to e not found. I think it's error model not found. I'm not sure, but I think this is what the error code is. Otherwise, we will let the base exception handler to handle the error for us. And from here, we can say cdx.response.notfound. And here we'll see errors, message property saying resource not found. Nope. So let's do console.log error.code. It's e row not found. Yep, it works fine. So let's go through it. What we are doing, we are saying like, we are telling our post model to find the post with the given ID. If it doesn't exist, like raise an exception. That exception make its way to the global exception handler. And out here we say, anytime you get an exception with the code e row not found, just return this, like standard static response. So our first test is passing, which, like assert against 404. We want to write another one which says uh, get post by ID. So this time I will use the post factory dot query dot with author create, and here we will get our post. Now instead of using this hard-coded ID, I will say post.id. And to solve this error, I will have to go to our factories and define the relation here exactly. So we'll say author, and it uses user factory. So everything's good. This time we expect 200, and we assert against the API schema. Next thing we want is response dot contains body that should match this. So we get an error inside our post controller. Let's return data post. We have another error. It says author should have required property. Yep, we don't return author. We'll say post.load author. This like basically loads the relationship that we have defined here. Yep, it works fine. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all we want to do. Let's go through our spec one more time. So yeah, we have written a test that looks for this status code. We have written a test that looks for this status code. Same is for creating a post. Same is for getting all the posts. And the good thing about using the API schema is, even though like you are putting in the manual effort to create the schema, now you can make sure that your tests are going to make sure that it's always up to date. So if you, let's say, change your controller, but you don't update your API schema, your test will fail. Similarly, if you change your API schema, but you don't update your code, your test will fail again. So it's kind of that middle path, which is helping you to keep your code and your API schema in sync. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. So we touched the authentication, we touched file uploads and faking the drive. We looked into using API schema for assertions. We've been through like some basics of the test, which is like having these hooks, or maybe like having global hooks to load ACE commands or run migrations. And yeah, that's pretty much all. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, we will end this stream. So we are testing API endpoints. Would it be different if you are testing a full web Adonis app, including the front-end forms and all? Yes, it will. So right now we have this like API client that you're using to write the test. I'm already working on a package that will use this Playwright library to run headless browsers. And then you will, like be able to access something like a browser, and then you will be able to say like browser dot visit some page, and like click on some buttons, fill some form. So that will like give you a more UI driven test against the HTML or like the DOM that your application renders. You will be able to do that as well. I'm already like working on that package. All right, then. I think we don't. Okay, we have. So Stephen says, thank you a lot, work. You're awesome. Can't find words to describe that feeling. You're a genius. Thank you so much uh, for your words. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all we wanted to talk about. So let's finish this stream. I will push all this code to a GitHub repo. So if you want, you can have a look at it. See ya, guys. Goodbye.